Okay. Thank you, guys. I just started the recording now. Cooperative values and principles are what differentiates us cooperative from any other type of business. And okay, Tony is coming in. And in particular, our values is what differentiates us from the ordinary business that we are meeting every day in our everyday life. And these values, it's worth to remind ourselves, are the values of self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. And those values are not just small values that we are kind of remind ourselves of, but are actually enshrined in our constitutions and in our way and practice, way of working and practice. Co-operative Fortnight is also about the future, and our kind of, it's an event all across the UK, and our slogan for this year is let's build something better. Just because we are coming out from a COVID-19 emergency, and we have experienced a different way to relate to each other. So we wanted to continue exploring these different ways, alternative ways, to make our life, our society, and our economy more cooperative in essence and in practice. So I'm not going to indulge in any other speech, but I wanted to really think about these three questions. And this is not about me or Ellie, it's about us introducing the question to you. And it's about also discussing how we can answer those three questions and how we can make those three questions real for our future. So the first question is about how have you been impacted by the COVID-19 emergency, and how did you help others during the lockdown as a cooperative, as an individual, as your community? Question two is how others have helped you. What type of support have you received to run and sustain your co-op so far? And question three, to build back better together, what type of changes would you like to see in the near future, in the long term? So I'm going to stop to share, and I will we are going to introduce each question again, and I pass it to Ellie.
Thank you. Can you all hear me first? Just checking. Yes, amazing. So for those who don't know me, I'm Ellie Perrin. I'm a PhD student in the University of Liverpool, a former cooperator in the Belfast Cleaning Society as well. And at the moment, I'm doing an internship with Co-operative Alternatives. So that's why Tiziana asked me to co-chair or co-facilitate this session. So our first question, I think, is we've all been obviously affected by the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, the lockdown. We've been affected as individuals, as families, as communities, and also as co-ops. So this is very much an opportunity to come together in the room and talk about the impact that it has had on us. And I'm thinking in particular, we've seen a revival of mutual aid groups and solidarity groups. We've also seen changes in our consumption practices through this lockdown. So these are interesting things to reflect on. But we're also interested in how your co-ops has maybe reorganized their services or dealt with the crisis to kind of meet new needs that were emerging through the lockdown. Please introduce yourself as well if you're starting speaking. Anyone?
I will introduce myself. So my name is Guillaume. I am working in Belfast. So with a group we have just restarted our co-op a couple of months ago. So it's more on the model of customer co-op. consumer cooperative. Not only exist, but we don't have, it's not a worker cooperative. So we are planning to involve a wide range of members and have them to buy buy ethical products from our own cooperative. So that's that's who we are. We haven't been too much impacted by COVID because we are just newly registered. So it's just a work in progress. But we are interested to know how other co-ops have worked and what difficulties they have had, because we are trying to grow our business in that context.
Okay, Ellie, will I go next?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Murdo Murray here, a member pioneer with the co-op working in Donaghadee and Ballyholme. People hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay. How have I been affected? I've lost control of my house. That's how I've been affected. I've been banished into a kitchen for the last 3 months because my wife and daughter have both been working at home. My wife Patricia works for Social Farms and Gardens. They're a UK charity, and she's been coordinating their activities over this period. And my daughter works for the Black Box for their learning disability charity. And so the downside is I've lost control of my house. The upside is it's been quite interesting to see just how much can be done from the base of a house and just what the connections are. So that's been quite interesting. The kind of work I've been doing since then, I need to be careful what I say because my manager Gillian's on this call and she'll be listening in, and she may well challenge anything I have to say and deny it. So be careful. Anything I'm doing, of course, it's at her behest, and they're all her ideas. And she's a marvelous manager. Is that okay, Gillian? Right. Okay, I'll keep going. The sort of stuff I've been trying to do then is sort of make connections between the local communities, which have been doing a great job. Some of the established community development associations just immediately clicked into gear. They get a few pounds from Community Foundations NI, or they renegotiated their funding relationships with the lottery, or they got some money from the council or whatever, and just really moved immediately to, in particular, to address the needs of local, vulnerable citizens living here in a whole variety of ways. The obvious ways were getting food, accessing medicine, checking on people socially, those kinds of things. So that's what I've been doing. And sorry, my radio just clicked on, it heard my name there. I'll stop just now and put that off. So that's just a brief introduction anyway. Alexa, radio off, please. Sorry, I think Alexa joined us there. There's now there's a third person in all our relationships called Alexa. I just said that again, she's on. Right, I'll stop now.
Think anyone else do you have a few words?
Hi. Ellie?
You want to jump in?
Yeah,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I had technical problems. I hope everyone, no? People's hearing me now, good.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. It's Billy. I know most of your faces from the Raglan and Ballymena. Yeah, as regards the build, the build is more or less slowed down because of COVID. Moving that forward has proven very difficult. Interestingly, our projects have been good, especially around the community allotment, where social distance awareness has been good, but we've been able to move forward quite dramatically there, and also have actually brought more volunteers into the picture, which has been good. For we see a stronger belief now in allotment and in this mutual work, and so that side of it has been interesting for us over the past few months. If we could just get to the point where we could get more people actually to see the results of it now, would be quite good. Sorry, Karen, I'm just seeing that maybe it wasn't me that was speaking there.
That's all right. We could hear you.
Thank you.
Just continue.
Keep going, Billy. You were talking well there.
All right, sorry. Sorry, you would say that I'm not very used to Zoom meetings. No, that's more or less a quick synopsis of where we are in the Raglan. Thanks for that.
Sorry, Karen, do you want to speak now? You do.
We can't hear you, Karen.
Karen, we can hear you. Do you have your speakers on? Have earphones maybe? That would.
Karen, if you can hear us, maybe you wanted to check again your settings, because I couldn't hear you before. Anybody else can go before, after, sorry, before Karen, and Karen can sort it out?
Okay, well, I'm Gillian Kelly and I work with the Co-op food stores, and COVID has probably been an interesting time for us as a whole. Most of the staff have carried working throughout COVID. Food stores have obviously been extremely busy trying to cope with the rise in demand, particularly people starting to shop a lot more locally and in the smaller stores. I know at first it was very challenging for the stores, trying to get stock out there, trying to deal with social distancing. We don't have delivery services by and large in our stores. Sorry, I have a cat here standing on something. So the stores had to start trying to get delivery services set up very quickly to help those customers who've been, shielding and self-isolating. And I think the stores have coped quite well with that on a very ad hoc basis, trying to get, it's been really a lot of, I'm feeding cat here. A lot of it's really been down to store colleagues trying to get out there, trying to get some of the deliveries out to the vulnerable in society. Funeral care has also been extremely busy. I think things are slowing down now, so they have been hit quite badly with the increase in death rates. I know a lot of staff have had to start working extra hours, so it's been a very busy time for us in the co-op. On the community side of things, me and Murdo are involved, and we've been working throughout from home, trying to link in with the different initiatives within our communities, trying to provide a bit of support out there for communities. And I've been doing some work with our charity partnership, Inspire, just trying to kind of collect drawings, pictures, send them on to people in supported housing, just trying to keep different links there, trying to keep people engaged. So it's been a busy time. I don't think I've ever been busier in this job than I have over the last few months. So it's been interesting. We've probably, I'm sure the food side of the business will have done actually very well out of the COVID. They've seen a sharp increase in sales. So we've been impacted, but it's probably done the co-op quite well, I would say. Funeral care has been busier, food have been busier, and for us in the community, it's given us a chance to show what we can do and kind of prove ourselves and prove our worth. So we've probably done better than a lot of other businesses through COVID.
Well said, Gillian.
Yeah, amazing. Is Karen back? Karen, can you hear us? No, probably. Okay, does anyone else want to contribute until Karen comes back, or maybe we can add a few questions otherwise?
I'm happy to introduce myself, although my name's Lee Tiziana, and I work together on some community wealth building work last year, and I'm not connected with any co-ops, but very interested in co-ops and how they sit in the wider community wealth building, new economy kind of picture as well, and to provide support wherever I can to help grow co-ops and to get conversations going about how we reshape the economy so that it works for people and not against them. So I live in Carrickfergus, and actually my kind of key observation from coronavirus pandemic is that the council and a charity not really connected with Carrickfergus prevented any real opportunities for mutual aid to happen at a neighbourhood level. And I thought there was a real opportunity to kind of build a stronger sense of community in Carrick, and that was kind of circumvented very, very quickly. So, you know, there's been really great stories, but actually, you know, some of the challenges around, so charity is not mutual aid. It can be very, very clearly needed in places, and that's partly because the economy is not working and so many people are in food poverty, but it's not mutual. And I suppose I'm interested in stuff that recognises that, and the word vulnerable that was bandied about so frequently. At the start of this situation, we're all vulnerable. All human beings are vulnerable, and particularly vulnerable in this situation. And lots of people have things to offer their communities, even though if they may also need a food parcel delivery. And that, for me, is really important that we recognise that everybody has something to contribute as well. And I just like to see the conversation start to shift a bit around that stuff too, so that people aren't, because what I saw in my town was lots of food parcels being delivered to people and you never heard their voices once. You never heard the voices of people who were going, this is really terrifying, actually, being dependent on food parcels being delivered and having all that and having no autonomy. And that's, I think, you know, we need to, and no doubt some of that stuff will come out in the longer term, but it needs to be, we need to pay attention to that as well as doing really important work, taking care of people. That's, sorry, that's not, it's not good. And,
can I just comment on it? I'm very surprised to hear that, I think you indicated an outside charity almost took over the response.
They were invited to be by the council, and that, I suppose, you know, that they're for the borough, so the kind of, you know, that's the problems about how council boundaries were shaped in that as well, so that it was actually in Ballymena, and Ballymena and Carrick don't really have a relationship. And that,
are there no Indigenous community organisations in Carrick that would have taken on the responsibility and invited the council in rather than the other way around? I don't know,
well, that's one of the issues in Carrick, as the community infrastructure here isn't particularly strong.
Oh, see. Okay, yeah, just interesting.
Yeah, so so they ended up, they did have to work with some local community associations, and but so there were green shoots of mutual aid kind of popping up on social media and stuff like that, and the energy gets sucked out of them very, very quickly because there was this more a formal official response that it was a missed opportunity, I think. But people getting food parcels may well say, shut up, that doesn't matter, I just needed some food delivered, which is also a valid point.
Amazing, thank you for that. I think you're right to point out that somehow I think the crisis has also shown us that first we are very much dependent on each other. We very much need to care for each other as a community, as a society. And it showed the inadequacies of the system very much and how the economy is not working for us. So I hope we can talk more about this later, and how do we integrate cooperation and mutual aid in our conception of our economic relationship with each other. I think that would be quite important. I just wonder maybe if Karen can come in now, if this is working or not. Oh, Tony wants to come in as well.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Okay,
I'm having doubts now after watching Karen's problems, you know. Yeah, okay. So I'm Tony. I'm a member of Co-operative Alternatives Board, but in my day job I work for Shelter, and we provide services not in Belfast at the moment, but in the West. And you know, we had to shut down a lot of the when we were unable to continue with our employment practices as they were. People were taken to work from home, and some of the services we were doing included deliveries from vans and whatever. So we repurposed the vans and gave them out to community organisations to do what the kind of thing Murdo was talking about, delivering medicines and food and whatever. So that's really been a good thing. And the whole networks that were formed in around, this is in around Strabane, the whole networks that were formed in there were all new, but were very quickly formed, and there was such tremendous amount of interest amongst the local community to deliver and do things. So you got people with who had all the skills of delivering and who were PPE, had all the PPE and all the right gear and so on, and all sort of worked very, very smoothly. And I'm also connected into a few other things. So, well, within shelter, just to pick up the point that both Murdo and Gillian have been talking about, we've been working closely with what you would call this sort of street culture around Belfast, the people who are delivering to homeless and people who are in food poverty on the streets. And we've been working with the 13 or 14 organisations who are actually who are on the street, or were on the street before COVID, although they've now come back onto the street because there are people out back on the streets, unfortunately. And so that's been very interesting. And some of the soup kitchens like St. Patrick's and so, we've been working closely with them. And when you talk to them about the extent of the food poverty and the amount of people that are phoning them constantly looking for food, they actually had to get 2 new phones installed to pick up the people who were calling them for food, help food, and it is just a phenomenon. And there isn't the statutory agencies out there really able to do it, and even the charities, although I heard you mention the Carrick situation. But a lot of this is driven by local communities actually just working harder. And you see the opening up of Food Bank in North Belfast and in the Spectrum and so on. Lots of that work going on. It's an amazing response really from the local community. And we are, it's the sort of thing we're good at when we want to be. And I think it's tremendous. Just a slight, recognizing Murdo's situation, working from home. I don't have loads of people working at home, but I kind of talking to people, I'm Zooming a lot. So I find this distinction between home life and work life quite difficult. I'm not very disciplined, so I tend to be working. And I kind of feel like I'm working all the time now instead of getting a break. And I do think that, that's something I have to kind of come to terms with and try to find some way around that. But outside of that, then the other work I'm kind of doing, I work with Co-housing Connections, which is an umbrella organisation trying to promote co-housing schemes in Northern Ireland. So we've been working with a group of us working on a rural scheme, which is quite far advanced, and then others are working on a pilot scheme in an urban area, and we're hoping that will be a cooperative or something along those lines. We've been spending, it's about one thing you can do is get people on Zoom. So we've been able to sort of lobby a lot of the Belfast City councillors and other people trying to promote the whole concept and what it's about, and trying to get sites for a pilot scheme. And that's been, that has actually worked quite well, worked in our favour, because councillors are kind of more immediately available, and it's easier to get them on Zoom than it would be to have a meeting in a room somewhere. So that's been very interesting. So, but generally, it's I think it's a really new kind of vision that we need here, and I think what other people, Tiziana and others, have said. We need to rethink what we're doing, and moving forward, we need to find and really harness that community energy that's already out there, but it's clearly been demonstrated that in response to COVID. On the other side of it, you've got an immense amount of new need as well, which is going to be a tremendous problem for us all to try to manage. But I think if we do it right, I think we can sort of guide our way through using community networks and community support to try to meet that need. And I'm sort of hoping, I'm quite hoping that we can really move things forward very definitely. Okay.
Well said, Tony. Nice to see you again. Tony, you're saying you don't know how to use Zoom, but you're the only one that's managed to sit in front of what looks like an interesting array of books behind you and some artifacts. I'm sure that's deliberate. Absolutely. So I'm going to check later on to see what your reading material is.
I don't read it. It's all my wife. She's the creative one. There's a feature in the background with it's James Joyce. It's a bust which she created with glasses. There was a moustache on it until my grandson took it away, and the bowler hat.
That's
and
fabulous.
all of these cameras, old cameras, she collects them just from eBay and Amazon. Anyway, it's all hers. This is my instrument room. I've got all my instruments over here, but I'm not going to show them off. So, but yeah, it's nice to see you, Murdo.
Cheers.
Tony, do we try Karen? Can you to speak now? We can't hear you. Okay. I don't know if Tiziana, do you want to move on to our second question? The future,
Yeah,
after the COVID
yeah,
crisis.
thank you very much. I think that we have picked up some of the interesting point, but because it's about cooperation, I think that we should really stick to this kind of theme for our chat, and how cooperation maybe is different from charitable work. And I think that's an important point that we made. And how and if we can, in our mind, make a distinction between solidarity and mutual aid and philanthropic aid. So maybe those two are two, well, they deserve a bit more reflection. This is what I'm saying. They may intertwine, but they are different in nature. And one of the main things that I think cooperatives makes the point of, that members are all equal. You don't have the aider and the aided. It's about the quality of sharing a situation of emergency in which we are all equally impacted by. And I think that, Guillaume, for instance, was very modest because the Belfast Food Co-op was set up, it's a small group, and it was set up during the emergency. But the first thing that, the first initiative they supported was actually to raise money among themselves, among the cooperative members, to help and provide food that was not included in the food parcels, the famous food parcels, but was a healthy, organic food, because they were motivated by the respect they had for their neighbors. Their neighbors, they wanted to provide them what they ate themselves, food and healthy, and food that was nutritious, not just a soup. So we needed to really, I think, bring to the fore what cooperatives do differently if we want to understand our identity. This conversation is to understand ourselves, what our identity is. For instance, another things that Karen probably would have said, that they have give a moratorium for to the community centers on which they have the solar panel, so they didn't issue invoices for any kind of payment. And that was another mutual aid, understanding each other's difficulties and put in place actions that really help, not from the top, but from the equals, us to our members. And I think that are very nice and interesting concept. Sorry, that's it. I think we can go to the second question, Ellie. I go second. So the second question is really, it's about thinking about your cooperative work or your cooperatives, the one you are involved with, and think about what kind of support you got. Maybe from other members, your own members, maybe from the government, maybe from a local authority. Were you asked if you needed help? Were you given help? That's the question.
Will I just comment quickly? Whoever, Murray again. I'm not sure where I am on these terminologies, Tiziana. I mean, I'm looking at cooperative versus charity and solidarity versus philanthropy. And I don't know that we're necessarily talking about polar opposites in any sense. Some of that, you can look at all of those four can be looked at pejoratively, if one wants to, equally they can be looked at as values that are positive. And even like, to your question, you're asking us how others have helped you. I'm almost reluctant to say now because I don't want to appear vulnerable and in receipt of services rather than someone who's been in response to doing something about the local communities are taking part. You can be both. I mean, which is maybe going back to a colleague, can't read all in it. Is it Karen? Sorry, Karen's comment there, which was been maybe a little bit critical about something being imposed from outside, if I picked it up properly, like a council from outside, although maybe we have different views as whether councils are outside or not. It depends on relationships one has with councils and politics, and in quotes, a charity from outside been imposed on a local community. Now, sometimes if that's the provision of an emergency service that no one else can provide, then that's okay, because sometimes we just have to depend on the assistance of third persons or people outside. If something you have to do something very quickly if the resources aren't there. But if that's about a way of denying, and going back to your say the cooperative versus charity or solidarity, if that's denying, as it were, somebody's integrity or not recognising that we all of us have, irrespective of our circumstances, or something to contribute, then that's not healthy. But when it comes to an emergency, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do, and then we reflect on it afterwards. And so that charities and philanthropy, we could spend a lot of time saying just how bad they are. Why do we have to have charities? Why do we have to have philanthropy? We have taxation. So what's the problem? That should provide services, but it doesn't provide services. But we have a reasonable sense of a mature government here. It ought to provide service, but of course it doesn't. So therefore, other things have to happen, and those other things sometimes are spontaneous, and people doing things individually. And some of the really good things that have happened here have been about spontaneous individuals making things happen. Sometimes it's about community development organisations taking on a sense of responsibility for their community and trying to do something, and then brokering in. So that in the case of Carrick, it obviously would have been better if an Indigenous organisation or people living there had taken on the responsibility and then they brokered in services, whether that was a council, a charity, or a private sector, or whoever it came from, and maybe it didn't happen. That's just a response to Tatiana's comments. And so, but the question was, how have others helped you? What was really interesting as my association with the co-op. Thinking back, I may have thought the co-op was just a shop where you go and shop, but it's not. And so the co-op, for instance, in Donaghadee, I live in Donaghadee, the co-op in Donaghadee has demonstrated its significance to the local community. Obviously, it was important that shop stayed open because it provided access to food and variety of types of food. Some of those were lovely and organic. Some of them were of a different nature, and it just depends on whatever. But it really was important, and the way in which they were able to respond and work with local community organisations. Initially, simply, getting food out to folk who needed food. You're champing on people's doors and saying to them, "Look, can we help?" That sense of neighbourliness, those range of kindnesses, I think, was significant. So how that helped me, it's been good to be associated with something beyond myself, and that at a time when some of us maybe could have fallen inwards, because it's quite challenging time psychologically and emotionally, and no matter how capable many of us think we are or how independent we are, there were times, certainly early on, where I think a lot of us were really quite scared and quite confused and just worried what was happening. So it was nice to be a part of something bigger. Right. So Gillian, it was nice to speak to you, Gillian, on a regular basis. It was nice to speak to other member pioneers colleagues, throughout Northern Ireland and different parts of Scotland and Cumbria, and just to see what they were doing. So anyway, so that sense of being part of something else. I'll shut up now, Tatiana.
Thank you. Billy.
One of the things that slightly concerns me at the moment would be drift away from the origin of what the organisations were established for, and I see a danger I see a danger, and I'm involved in, those of you know me, I'm involved in the REG. I'm also involved in the credit union, and at times I think over what COVID-19 showed us that we drifted away from the point of what we were there for, and I do believe it. I do believe, and I've always said this to people, there's an issue at where volunteers meet paid staff. And I think one of the big problems, and I've seen it coming through without being too critical of organisations, and I think maybe the lady in Carrick's possibly saying maybe making the same point in a slightly different way, that where volunteers are, I think, go the extra mile, where paid staff work inside very specific sets of criteria. I'm also Mid and East Antrim, the same as a lady from Carrick, and I've seen issues with some council officials at the moment that you can't even get a meeting with them, for they're not allowed to come on sites and that kind of thing. So I think it's maybe not helpfully received. It's maybe more of a lesson, and maybe I'm making the right point at the right time. But I think there's a need to understand better that boundary, because then the help could be a lot better if we knew that, keep the credit union open for what it can do, or what help can you give. Like we get continually warned that there's a second spike coming. Today there were 7 new cases I noticed recorded, and immediately you sit back and say, wow, 7 new cases, what's happened there? So maybe there is a second spike coming without being too scaremongering, so to speak. So I think there is lessons to be learned about the help that was given, and I do believe that boundary between paid staff and volunteers needs to be looked at, for I think there more help could be given across it, if that makes any sense.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm listening. There are any other point of view that anybody wanted to say anything?
Or maybe
yeah,
me, yeah.
Guyo.
So I found interesting to notice that the government was there more to try to compensate the loss in businesses, while the actual solution for reopening the businesses or getting the business to work seems to have worked more locally, where cooperative or businesses manage to work together. So if I take, for instance, in North Belfast, Loveworks have worked with other companies like Mike's Fancy Cheese, and I think they have actually enhanced their relation and managed to get a lot of benefits out of that. And they actually managed to turn around their business and make it even sometimes more profitable, which is kind of a good news. I don't know if the solution would have come from the government. I don't know if we can expect the government always to chip in that relation, but it's good to see that cooperation worked in this circumstance.
Thank you very much. And okay, Mary, what you want to say something, Mary? Unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Mary, and I'm not involved in the co-op, and I took a sabbatical this year to go back to university from my job, which is working in an advice centre. So this year was really strange for me. When the COVID hit, it was really strange because I wasn't at work in the centre. And but one thing I would say is that for me, the crisis has exposed something that was already there. The food poverty, it's just exposed it, it's increased it, but it's been there for years. We've been dealing with it at a community level, cooperating as community organisations. Where I work, we formed a group a couple of years ago now, maybe 3 years ago now, in order to meet, to help people in crisis, because as I say, this is not new. And we've been relying on St Vincent de Paul, we've been relying on the food bank, we've been relying on actually raising some funds ourselves so that we could have some emergency cash to give to people who didn't have gas or electricity. So, you know, that for me it's just exposed the cracks. And when I saw all, you know, all the food parcels, I thought, you know what, quite a few of those people needed food beforehand, and now they're getting more easily access to it, you know. And I like the question about solidarity versus philanthropy and charity, you know, versus cooperation and mutual aid. And I do agree, but we have to meet needs. You definitely have to meet needs, but you then have to start saying, well, hang on here, why is there so much need? And to start asking those questions and to try and make something different. And I've an interest in community wealth building as well. I'm sitting day in, day out at my computer doing my dissertation, and I have an interest and would like to support all I can in cooperatives and worker buyouts of companies, anything. And I love a phrase that's been going around in my head that I heard a woman use. I think she quoted the person from Boston who's in charge of economic development, that in order to get someone to lift someone out of poverty, they get a job. You know, a job will lift somebody out of poverty. In order to stay out of poverty, they need assets. You know, and that's just been going round and round in my head about, you know, there's so much work about getting people jobs, but we've been given, you know, people, we've been helping people who are in jobs who are still in poverty because they have to rely on social security help because the salaries don't pay enough. So I think it's interesting how we build out of this and how we put pressure on to make sure we don't go back to the way things were, and how we try to create a different future, obviously, of which co-ops should be very much a part of. So
thank you. I can say that I agree very much. I mean, cooperative are a way to create wealth and assets for the people involved in it. Exactly that, because the assets are equally co-owned, the profit is fairly distributed, so the wealth is trickling down. What we haven't seen in the current systems are all these mechanisms. The wealth has belonged to somewhere else and not to the people that actually contribute to the creation of the assets. And I love it. For this reason, I love cooperatives.
Yeah.
But, anybody else want to say something on this topic? Oh, okay, sorry. We have something from Karen. She wrote, can I read it out to everybody? Community volunteers have been invaluable in recent months, doing what our public service couldn't, and much more expediently. It is incredibly frustrating that we are unraveling those community volunteers are not being given a voice in shaping future services. The pandemic has shown what it is possible to do rapidly. There have been many comments about cleaner air, airing nature, and hope for a green recovery. This has quickly been forgotten, as we see from the Bournemouth beaches. So in some sort of way, I thank you, Karen. That's a great comment. In some sort of way, there is a fear that we were in emergency state and everybody loved collaborating and cooperating. But because we are supposedly, allegedly, without any kind of scientific proof coming out the emergency, now we are going back to what we were, and all these things are not addressed anymore. Billy, do you want to come in? Is that your hand raised?
Yes, yes, please. Sorry, Tiziana. Firstly, I'm going to have to leave you soon and apologise for that. But I think you make a very valid point as they talk about what is the new normal, and I think you're absolutely right. There's a danger, and Bournemouth Beach demonstrated that we could quickly return to the old normal, and that the story of from say St. Patrick's Day, I always associate the arrival of the issues and St. Patrick's Day this year with the lockdown was announced the 19th. I remember the last time I was out was St. Patrick's Day. So post St. Patrick's Day this year, there's a danger that society very quickly could forget. and that we would find ourselves when the accountants take over society again. Because at the moment, the furlough and that doesn't belong to the accountants' world. But there is a point in time that the accountants will start to be able to put pressure back onto the world again. And that, I think, may be the danger, that the normal that we would like to see as believers in cooperative movements will be harder to maintain.
Lee, you wanted to say something? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm quite uncomfortable with pointing the finger at people on beaches rather than at governments who are responsible for shaping policy and making decisions about how we live our lives, and step back from stuff around Green New Deal and stuff like that. I just feel like it's really deliberate tactic to distract us from the people in power who have responsibility for deciding how to spend money to make a difference and to help us build a different world. So I'm more interested in holding them to account, which I think we absolutely should do. But I also think that ordinary people do want things to change. I run a Facebook group called Positive Carrickfergus, and it has a few thousand people in it. And at one point, about 3 or 4 weeks into lockdown, it was like, what? It is hard. This is hard. Acknowledging it's hard. I didn't ask this question, but what are you enjoying about, like, that's always very difficult because some people are having a really, really hard time and other people are enjoying so it was the pace of life was one of the biggest things. People come back and said that not rushing around, not being busy all the time, a much slower pace of life. And this was just, these are just ordinary people who, or, in quotation marks, who live in Carrick, right? And sometimes I wonder, because I come to conversations like this and I think, am I just in a way bubble, right? Saying maybe the world could be different. And, maybe the vast majority of people are like broadly fine with the way the world is. But it just really struck me how many people seem to be saying, and then I was thinking about all those videos that were circulating, the great pause. There was a couple of different videos that were trying to communicate a different idea on social media as well about, and how strongly people reacted to those as well. So there is, in my view, a kind of fairly widespread sense that the way that we have been living doesn't work. But I think the real challenge is most people don't know how to make any changes to that. They don't, so they can, they can have a sense that this doesn't feel great and people are unwell and we're too busy, and some sense that we're damaging the environment. But, people don't, I think on the whole, people don't know how to change their own lives or to come together. And, you say to most people in Carrick, do you know what a cooperative is? Like, I don't think they'd have any idea. So the challenge is to find ways to bring those potential solutions to the attention of ordinary people and connect it with that sense of we're making a mess. We're making a mess of the way we live together and to the planet. I also run a repair cafe in Belfast, and that's the thing for us that we notice more than anything else is when people come to repair cafes, like, they're kind of relieved because there's something they can do, because they didn't know. They're so, like, there is a sense of kind of despair and like, they don't want to throw their stuff away, but they don't know what else to do with it. And by giving people a bit of a solution, you can kind of bring them into a sense of a bigger movement, and then talk about how we need to change how we're consuming and how we're dealing with waste. So that, so I think I just, and that, so for me, it's really about finding ways to connect with ordinary people and say there are solutions here, actually, and because I think there are enough people who are open to hearing about those solutions and desperate for some answers as to how they make some changes.
And I think this is an important point, because in the cooperative movement, we do have those solutions. For 150 years, we try to implement a different type of economy. So, but are we all collectively telling the right message? Are we telling the right story to connect with the people that are still, and I go back to Guyon, you know, cooperation is the natural form, not competition. But for so many years, we've been kind of pushing, thinking that being competitive, it will improve our survival rates, when even in this COVID-19 emergency, we realize that cooperation has improved our survival rate, because cooperating with each other in the lockdown have done that to us. But there is a hand up, and then we have, it's a Murdo hand up, and then we are going back to Ellie for the final question about what is the future. Morton, to you.
Okay, hand up, thank you. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm getting naive in my old age or whatever, but the world hasn't changed on its axis. The political world hasn't changed on its axis, and it won't change on its axis in quotes and whatever the so-called new normal is going to be. But what has happened though, and you were just beginning to say that there, I thought Tiziana was, what was that because there's been an emergency around which we've all had to respond in some way, there's been a sense of actually people, and you know, as far as I can see, of trying to find ways in which we could work together, which is a form of cooperation. Trying to find ways in which we can help one another, which is a form of cooperation. Now, sometimes you can call that philanthropy, sometimes you can call that charity, and you can be pejorative about that, and I can be pejorative about that, but you don't have to be, because those things can be good things as well. You know, if it's philanthropy about something from on high, and it's been bestowed on something that's been bestowed on someone, then that's a negative. If it's about philanthropy in the sense of a commonweal or a commonwealth, that's different. What's I think quite interesting is to look at the ways in which different governments across the United Kingdom and the British Isles, including the Republic, have responded. And the way in which, as far as I can see, citizens have responded in a way, for instance, to the leadership, dare I say it, in a cooperative discussion of Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. There's been quite a contrast between that and the way in which people have responded to the nonsense of Boris Johnson and his various folk. You know. And I think that's interesting, because that hasn't just come from nowhere. That's come from, in the case of Scotland, obviously I'm Scottish, although I've been away for a long time now, but there's obviously, or it seems to me, there's a sense of people working together, and I use that term commonweal, which is a Scottish term, that sense of people working together towards some kind of common purpose. And I think that's interesting. Even in the context of Northern Ireland, and it's been difficulties the last day or so, obviously with Michelle and funerals and all the rest of it, it's been interesting to see the way in which politicians who just before the end of the year, you know, were biting lumps of one another, have actually put together some kind of process, some kind of polity to offer us some kind of sense of addressing the problems of COVID-19. Which I think is interesting. Obviously, there are many weaknesses there, and we're all of our thoughts as to who the politicians are and all the rest of it. But I think that's interesting. So I do think there are some positives coming from this experience that give us some chance to think again, and maybe it's moving on to your third question, about ways in which we can do it. But it's not going to change the world. It's not going to change the political reality of what's not going to out there. It's not going to change capitalism. It's not going to promote socialism necessarily. We all of us still have to work at all those things. But I do think there's been something in that sense of a shared experience and people working together, and those kind of kindnesses and recognition of the needs of others that I hope, it won't be a new normal, but I hope will give us some sense of working differently, and of where cooperatives are well placed are to capitalise on that. Because I agree with your introduction there, Tiziana, in terms of the values that are there within cooperatives. So anyway, so just maybe I'm too happy, maybe I'm too naive or whatever. I do think out of this, good things you may come, and you know,
I do agree with you. I love it what you're saying. You're saying that good thing came out. What we wanted to say also, good thing came out that can change the system. So, and that's maybe the introduction to Ellie question. Ellie, take over.
I think
Fed
it
up
is.
with all this.
But a very, very impressive way of translating that. So that's.
And I think, Murdos, you're saying, obviously, we're not going to take capitalism down, but we might at least try, you know, maybe that's the introduction to the question. Sounds very French, sorry. But so coming back to our third question, where how do we build, how do we cooperate, I think, for an alternative future? That is kind of the topic of, you know, this session. And what changes do we want for the future? And before, you know, everybody responds, I think there's a few things maybe we could talk about, just, you know, ideas. We've talked about ethical consumption, and it's been very important during this crisis. We've seen a lot of people have started to shop locally, to shop more ethically. So maybe there's opportunities. I'm thinking of Guillaume and Gillian here. This is something that might be interesting for you, you know, shopping locally or shopping in ethical, you know, shops. Other ideas that have been given are by Tony. You've mentioned about harnessing this mutual aid, this solidarity, you know, this surge in solidarity. And there's an issue here with all those groups that have emerged. Are they the cooperatives of the future? You know, could they become cooperative groups? Could they be, you know, cooperative organizations? Thinking of Karen as well about, you know, the green kind of trying to think about the recovery from this crisis and thinking about how do we embed environmentally sound practices? How do we look, you know, at green recovery? How do we look at cooperation as well as a way to develop a greener, more sustainable economy? And I think that's something important. We've been told there was no magic monetary, and somehow there's been, you know, that has just happened. And, you know, I think there's a lot of people have said, if we were dealing with climate change in the same way we're dealing with this, then, you know, how much could we do about it? And maybe the last question is, how do we make, you know, cooperative a viable policy option? What is needed here in terms of support, in terms of either it's legislations or policies, to really kind of embed cooperation in our vision for an alternative economic strategy? And I think Mary might have, you know, a lot to say about community wealth building here, because it's increasingly being looked at, you know, by Belfast City Council, for example, or local authorities. But how do we see the, sorry, I rephrase that. How do we make cooperation really have a contribution in terms of a greener and a fairer and a more sustainable economy? Anyone wants to contribute on those points?
You can read the contribution of Karen in the chat.
So nice, am I saying nice correctly? Yes, Nice and Drumlin Wind Energy Co-ops have been working very hard over the last couple of months on a community energy policy so that citizens can have a greater voice on our energy strategy. So that's an example of that.
Ellie, I didn't enter the last discussion, but I agree with a lot of everybody said. But I suspect that during the first period of COVID, anyway, before they started to reopen society, and most people were kind of locked in at home, and you know, you couldn't travel very far. So if you needed something, you really were very reliant upon creating something locally. I mean, a lot of and our neighbours here where I am set up little groups that you know, called on their neighbours, you know, just kind of to see, is everything okay, anything we can do to help. That kind of cooperation was and has been, I think, extraordinarily important. I mean, Mary's quite right. We've had the kind of food issue for donkey's years. There's nothing new about that. But you know, people were often isolated and probably didn't feel they could really talk to anybody in the local community. There maybe wasn't an opportunity for them to do anything, and they didn't feel strong that they could approach all the kind of traditional organisations like St Vincent de Paul and so on. but there may have been needs there. And I'm not saying, that there isn't an issue around charitable aid, and I mean, there's obviously a whole discussion around that. But what I'm really saying is that, people found that they could organize themselves locally in a local community base, and how do we kind of, and I think it was a good thing. I mean, I think that everybody would accept that that's been a good thing. How do we continue that when we're all kind of scattered back to work and we're back into our sort of semi-normal kind of arrangements, and we're not furloughed and we don't have that, we're not back into the community that we were before. So there was a kind of special period there when we were all really very localized. How do you, and the value of having that, I think, was really important. How do we capture that and take that forward? And I think that's one of the things that we really would be valuable to try to take forward, to try to encourage to sustain that in some way. It's the thing that people often talk about, is that it wasn't a thing in the past that the local community and the village and people all helped each other and all that kind of thing. And again, I'm not talking about charitable aid. I'm sort of thinking about people working together and collectively seeing a future. So that, to me, that was one of the big interesting lessons from the whole thing. And I don't know if I would love to be able to find the magic tool to sustain that and create that without going through another spike, without going through another COVID. How do we get that magic button? How do we push that magic button?
Tony, yeah, I think that's very interesting, and it is possible that some of those groups will transform into co-ops. That's one of the possibilities. Research being done at the moment on those groups, and seeing 6 months down the line, do they still exist and have they kind of registered, maybe, whether as a partnership or anything. So this would be very interesting to see. I want to say that Karen left a message as well. As a rural dweller, the value of our community shop. Oh, sorry. We have certainly realized the value of local community services. Exactly, Tony. This is the challenge, getting citizens to recognize their resilience and ability to provide valuable local services cooperatively, which give them a return rather than large monopolies. Who wants to jump on that? Mary, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to come in about community wealth building. Community wealth building, of which co-ops is very much a part of, because that's about more plural ownership of the economy. So what I'm hoping to do is I'm looking at Belfast City Council's they've called it an inclusive growth strategy, and I'm looking at it from the point of view, I know, Ellie, to your face. And despite the fact that they have been, what I think of as flirting with community wealth building for very many years, they have produced an inclusive growth strategy. And my whole reason for coming out of work and taking a sabbatical was because I was so fed up at looking at the symptoms of poverty, and I wanted to see, to look more at alternatives. And so I'm going to be interrogating their strategy and comparing it with community wealth building. For example, North Ayrshire, just across the water from us, have just brought out a beautiful new community wealth building strategy that's so, their total articulation is that we are wanting to deal with poverty and we're wanting to build back better. So there's some great models out there where people are trying to do things differently. I, like Murdo, I don't really have a sense that there's been any great political change, but I think change can come from communities. And I would love to say that some of the mutual aid groups would evolve into cooperatives. But the thing about it is, we're talking about self-help, and I'm afraid my computer's I need to plug it in. But, we're talking about the self-help in the community. And something like, one of the reason why I like community wealth building is because it's such a do-it-yourself. It's, it's looking at the wealth that's already in a community and seeing how it can be used better and how it can be shared better. For example, if you haven't heard of it, it's about looking at how the City Council, the Belfast Trust, how they procure, and could they be procuring more for social value, so that that they support local businesses, local SMEs, local cooperatives better. And then socially, it's about socially just use of land. It's about making financial power work for local places. Just today I was having a conversation about how there's so many millions sitting in credit unions, as you know, and they're not being used for local places. And I know Tiziana is involved in the campaign for a community bank. I mean, just look at a community bank who's really open to lending to SMEs and cooperatives. Look at the difference they could make. So there's some great initiatives that we can get behind, and co-ops being one of them, the community bank, which would be a co-op. And I think, you know, were you talking, Lee, about how do we raise awareness? I suppose for me, after finishing this year, that would be one of my hopes, that I could raise awareness of this approach and maybe produce, you know, and I hope to produce a document that can bring pressure to bear on the council to push them more in this direction. I think they have, they you know, there's some green shoots with them, for sure. But it's, you know, for me, I want them to be really articulate and look, you know, equity is not optional. You know, we're going to do everything to make sure that, you know, that poverty doesn't exist, or if there's another crisis, that we're better prepared and there won't be so many people in need of food. You know, so anyway, that's me.
Thank you, Mary. I think, yeah, the inclusive, we were talking about this with Tiziana, the inclusive growth strategy is very good on growth and not so much on inclusivity, but hopefully they'll change that. Tiziana, you wanted to comment?
Yes, I like it. I like it tonight, because we are a group of people that they are more or less all involved in cooperation in some sort of form, but we don't know each other as much as we should. So one of our principles is cooperation among cooperatives. So when I met Gillian, for instance, and started to know what army of people she has that are cooperators in and out, and we are so disjoint from them, I think that this is an opportunity for us to even look at the way within the movement, the cooperative movement, we support each other. So it's about outside, but it's also about inside, how all these cooperatives, the emerging, the very well established, the credit union, like Mary was mentioning, the cooperative group like Gillian and Murdo are actually working with, and the new one, the Guyon ones, Karen ones, how we can connect that and be true to Principle 6. Principle 6 of the cooperative principles says cooperation among cooperatives. And that is in itself transformative, because if that is what we want a transformation of our economic relationship, where we are not only consumers, but we are actively involved in the producing of the products that we consume, in the relationship of exchange, in the trade, all that. It's important that we are creating that connection among ourselves. That's my proposal.
Yeah, I think our little Belfast food co-op is going to try actually to develop this, and we actually are going to start to use a product created by the Open Food Network that kind of helps build a hub of a producer and consumers, help connect basically different businesses, including co-ops, to sell and to cooperate to make sure that food produced locally, or maybe a bit more remotely, but also locally, can be sold to a wider range of people. So that Open Food Network. I don't know if there's many people who are maybe the co-op food shops are having their own hub, a bit like that. I don't know if you are working with local producers, if you have a bit of flexibility yourself, but that's what we are going to try, I think, to develop in our next stage.
I know the food stores. We don't work the food side, so I don't know lots about it. But I know some of the food stores do, have work with their local, the local producers and local suppliers. So different stores will have different ranges. But I don't know how much work they do with that. But I know there would be in the co-op food stores, there would be a bit of work with some local suppliers. But
Okay.
I don't really know too much about that side of things. We're out in the community, so we don't really. We go into the shops and talk to the staff there, but that's about it. But I do know there are local ranges, and they do try to get some local kind of goods into their stores.
Yeah, yeah. And I think another thing that we are going to try to develop, as Marie said, there's a lot of poverty, and one of the aim of our co-op is to make ethical food available to the wider public, and by getting people to volunteer for our co-op, the price are going to be kept very low, and we hope that it might start a dynamic of people trying to find alternative ways to shop. Hopefully, that will last and that will develop maybe elsewhere. That's what we are trying to do.
And do you have a sense of what would help for co-ops to be? It sounds like that, Tiziana, what you're saying is the co-ops here to be better networked. What are the things that could help that happen?
Well, it's certainly better networks, better kind of a recognition of our identity, maybe. I think that this kind of events where we have so many different co-ops, the energy, the food, the retail, and the credit union. Billy, remember, is also from the credit union movement. I think those are important events, network events. We try to keep up the tradition as in cooperative alternatives to have at least one event per year in which we can actually connect. By the way, I didn't mention the workers' co-op that none of them could have come tonight, but they are there, they are present. So how do we connect these different types of cooperatives in a way in which we can create a real change? Connection happens if you recognize your common identity. So we needed to maybe rebuild our narrative, get away from misleading sense of social enterprising sense, maybe. That was one of the things that happened last year. That last year we had a network event and all our energy went into make differences. But the differences were irrelevant because nobody was sophisticated enough to describe what a cooperative is. So for us, cooperatives have cooperative identity, cooperative principles, cooperative values. And those are the ones that we needed to rediscover. If you are a credit union, if you are a retail shop, if you are an energy co-op, or a housing co-op like Tony, and you want to be a cooperative, then we need to rediscover what we have in common. And then shout what we have in common to the rest of the world. And I think that this commonality is a bit missing in Northern Ireland. I may say so, but I think this is missing.
Is my sound back?
Yes.
Don't know what happened. One of the things I think as well is government and public departments tend to belittle our co-ops because they see us as small fry, and they don't see that we are small but perfectly formed, and that we have an ability to be scaled up. So I think the message from the top needs to change as well, so that we can grow from the bottom.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I think Myrtle wanted to just comment, and then maybe we'll.
Sound is not very great. Can you say again?
Sorry, so I was like, thank you. I was going to thank Karen for this, and I think we might wrap this up unless someone else wants to jump in. But as you said, there is a need to change really policies at this level. And I wonder whether, you know, the work that I'm doing and the work that Mary is doing, you know, trying to raise awareness about cooperatives, trying to put them on the map, really is also important in that, and how you can, I think it's very important for researchers to hear from co-ops themselves, so that, you know, we can represent you accurately, and we can really, you know, maybe let you have a voice really at a policy level. Murdo, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was trying to work the system, so I wasn't sure whether you put your hand up to be allowed to speak or not. It's going back to Tiziana's comment there about how, in that sense of the principles of cooperative values, there are others that would share these principles. There are a whole series of concentric circles, aren't there? There are some people that might not call themselves cooperatives, they may not be cooperatives, but they would share the values. And I don't know what principle 6 come in there, I don't know what the other principles are, Tiziana, but I mean, one can assume what some of them are, you know, and it's that sense of working together, of addressing social injustices, you know, or whatever. There's a range of things, and there are a number of organisations in different sectors that would have sympathy with that. You know, now some of them are called community organisations, some of them are called multi-sector organisations, some of them, dare I say it, are called social enterprises, some of them are called private sector, and occasionally those aren't necessarily the enemy. Although some of us may share in that aspiration to bring down capitalism. But there are many colleagues and colleague organisations, and while it's important to hold some sense of integrity and truth to you or the organisation that one belongs, it's also important to reach out and find ways of working with others as well. So for instance, a discussion around food and food poverty ought to involve, which I'm sure it does, something like the Belfast Food Network, or it ought to involve organisations like Social Farms and Gardens that my wife works for, that address those kinds of things. Now, neither of those, for instance, are cooperatives. Social Farms and Gardens it's a registered charity. It also probably is some kind of corporate entity as well, I suspect, in terms of some of the things that it does. But presumably we're looking to find commonality and work with them. I mean, the co-op itself, some people will have used the co-ops as a bloody shop, you know, isn't necessarily a cooperative. The fact that it began as by the Rochdale pioneers 200 years ago, and all the rest of it, they might not see that that's the case. So anyway, what are the ways in which one finds common ways of working? I suppose that's all I'm thinking. So carry on there, Ellie. You're trying to bring us all together, aren't you? Yeah.
That's okay. I'll just respond very quickly on that. I think, yes, you know, a lot of social enterprises are doing great work, and a lot of charities are doing great work. But when you have cooperatives that are continuously sidelined, while they can be a lot more transformative, I think what we're trying to do is actually create that plain level field. No, I'm saying it wrong, but I'll sort that out. And that's really what we're trying to do. So yes, I agree with you, but at the same time, we know that co-ops are very much invisible. And I think qualitatively, they have so much more potential that we need to put them back on the map.
And actually, to go back to that point as well, they give people assets, which is very, very different to just having an income. There's more security in an asset.
Yeah, although, you know, capitalism provides people assets, dare I say it?
Yeah, but not
well.
not equally. Do you know what I mean? It's not shared. It's not like
no, and I'm not arguing against you. I mean, I would agree with you.
More though, I think you are doing just the devil kind of job tonight.
No, the devil's
you want to
job.
know the socialist. What happened to you?
The phrase is devil's advocate, not the devil's job. The devil's job is something altogether. No. But in sense of making common, obviously, and you would know that, obviously, that there are people who are working around trying to find ways in which government assets can be shared, buildings and access to buildings and those kinds of things. And there are some very interesting examples of that, particularly in Scotland. But intriguingly, that's the Scottish Government. And this is where it's interesting that we aren't necessarily, us and them, have been encouraging that and putting money into and trying to find ways in which, for instance, communities can take ownership of some of the crofting areas in parts of Scotland or in the Highlands and Islands. Whereas we are just at the very early stages. I mean, it's only in Bangor, I think, is the first of the community asset transfers about to happen, which is the old courthouse in Bangor. And how many years has it taken for that to happen? Anyway, sorry, I'm not disagreeing with folk. This is an interesting discussion.
Tony wanted to come in.
Yeah, there's no problem. I perfectly agree with the idea that cooperatives should cooperate with each other, and obviously it strengthens the bond between cooperatives, and I think it strengthens the voice that we have as well. But I think we have a little bit of a maybe it's not a disconnect, but I think there's an issue around what is the purpose in a way, because Mary was talking about community wealth building and trying to deal with food poverty and so on, and and if that's one of our objectives, one of the things I think is maybe a challenge for us all is to try to to take the situation that we had during COVID, when there was local communities and there was people able to organize themselves and deliver stuff to people who had a need. And whilst I'm not getting into that question, if we want people who are consuming, who've got a need, who need to consume from somebody else, if we want those consumers to be part of the solution and part of delivering the products for each other, then we need to find a way to connect with those people who are perhaps furthest away and hardest to reach in that sense. And I think, there's a challenge there for us to try to those of us here who are working with cooperatives or have done with that can talk to each other and strengthen our bond. But how do we reach the people who maybe, if we are looking to remove or equalize our society better in some way, those people who are at the lowest end of our society, how do we encourage them that there's a value in getting involved in doing what we're talking about, which is cooperating? How can they see the benefits of the things of working together, what it'll produce for them? And I think that's a real challenge for us.
Can I just say that there's the fact that the term mutual aid has become so visible over the last couple of months. There is an opportunity, that mutuality, which wasn't really right in the kind of common vocabulary, that there is an opportunity to build on that idea. And I think that funders, people with money would be attracted to something that says these mutual aid networks have developed through as a result of coronavirus, and there's an opportunity to build on those. But because I would imagine that at least some of those groups will go, well, yeah, it was really great working together, but we don't know how to turn it into something more with longevity and with a bit of infrastructure, and we don't know what that looks like. So some support around thinking about what that could look like together, with the concept of cooperation at the heart of it. I think there's an opportunity in that.
Thank you. I think can we bring it to the close? We are at 8 o'clock. We discussed this issue for an hour and a half, and thank you very much. Bring it to a close in a positive way, so we could, in a cooperative movement, look inside, connect more from the inside, but also take the challenge to communicate outside, to reach out, outreach, like Murdo suggested, to other organizations that may share part of our values, but also, like Tony say, to really try to find the purpose and identify the benefit to be more cooperative. And then finally, what Lee was saying, nurture the emerging and not suffocating the emerging from what is the sound or the cacophony of modern life can actually push down or press and really do not let emerge. So we have 3 strategies. So here we are. Have a good year. The Cooperation International Day, it's on Saturday. Remember, that's an international day recognized by the United Nations. So keep cooperating. This is our own kind of few words, and use those 3 strategies for the next year, I think, to build among ourselves and keep in touch. I love to have seen again Murdo and Gillian. Certainly carry on with the rest of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Looking at me.
Everybody, yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
See you again.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all the best. Thanks, Tatiana and Ella. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.